Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Welcome. Our forums are free and open to the public and occur most Sundays at noon. Our mission is to nurture the mind and the spirit and serve social justice. For more information about our forum programming, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. Today I'm honored and thrilled to be introducing Wayne Krause Yang, who is the legal director for the Texas Civil Rights Project. He's going to be talking about the work of the Texas Civil Rights Project and hard-fought victories. As many of you may know, the Texas Civil Rights Project is a freestanding nonprofit legal services center based in Austin, and its mission is to provide legal assistance and education to low-income and other marginalized people whose civil rights have been violated. It was founded in 1990 by Jim Harrington, an attorney also, of course, and it has handled over 2,000 cases and by now and has done tremendous community trainings to over 40,000 people. Wayne, of course, has been there for a decade. He's litigated hundreds of civil rights cases, including post-9/11 ethnic and religious profiling, police brutality, systemic denial of disability services, KKK-backed racial discrimination, and he helped strike down an unconstitutional anti-begging laws against the homeless and police blockades of anti-Bush protesters, and he has exposed and fought sexual assault in prisons and otherwise miserable conditions, and won the first trial that historic buildings are not exempt from the Americans with Disability Acts. He has won numerous awards for his work, and as you may know, the Texas Civil Rights Project is known nationally and internationally for being in the forefront of social change. Wayne went to law school at Georgetown. He's lived all over the world doing his civil rights work. He has worked at Now Legal Defense Fund previously, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, Legal Aid Society of Hawaii, and outside of his work, he continues to give pro bono legal assistance to immigrants seeking asylum. He is an amazingly dynamic and generous and committed guy. Let's give him a warm welcome. Wayne.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, and welcome everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming today. I really appreciate your dedication and interest in an open forum and fighting for civil rights. Bonnie said a lot of nice things about me. I'm sure maybe 1/10 of those things are true, but she's really nice. But the thing I want to emphasize is that, one, none of the things that I did by myself. Those were all done as part of a team of dedicated folks at the Texas Civil Rights Project working together. And it wouldn't be possible without courageous and dedicated citizens and people like you. Behind every case is a client, a person whose rights were violated and had the courage to stand up and say enough. So, like for myself, the Texas Civil Rights Project, all the work we do is part of a much greater team of people that get together and stand up for their rights. And I hope you will too. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit today about the Texas Civil Rights Project, what we do, and some of the incredibly pressing issues, civil rights issues, that face us today and have faced us over the last few years. Like Bonnie said, I've been an attorney at the Texas Civil Rights Project for 15 years and the legal director there for over 8 years now. So I've seen quite a few of these myself, and they are quite daunting. But never fear, because we have great faith in folks like you to stand up for your rights, and we will be there to help you and all the people of Texas. So the Texas Civil Rights Project has offices in 5 places across the state of Texas. We are a statewide organization, and we have offices in El Paso, in South Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, in Austin, as well as in Houston. I'll tell you a little bit more about what we do, but before I do that, I figured I'd let some people who are a little bit more eloquent than me start.
My name is Amin Al-Hasham, and I'm a staff attorney and regional director of the Texas Civil Rights Project Houston office. Texas Civil Rights Project was formed 20 years ago because of a need for community-based organizing in Texas. It started with the farm workers down in South Texas who were being used and abused by a lot of the large agricultural companies, and because a lot of them were immigrants, they didn't have the bargaining power of the large corporations. Texas Civil Rights Project really started down in the field organizing the farm workers so that they collectively would have a greater voice to advocate for their rights. Since then, it's grown into a statewide campaign that takes on issues from labor rights to employment rights to disability rights to civil rights, just a vast number of issues that everyday Texans always need help with. TCRP also conducts a program under the Violence Against Women's Act and provides social and legal services to low and moderate income victims of domestic violence. Houston, Texas is #1 in the country as far as income discrepancy is concerned. We have the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor here. Whenever you have the great income discrepancy, you have issues with access to resources. And so what we do, we try to provide access to the courts for those who would otherwise not have access to legal remedies, and educate people through Know Your Rights educations to let them know that in certain instances that they have legal rights, and a lot of times it's all about educating people about what those rights are so that they know that there are actions that they can take. Because of the nature of our funding, we are a pro bono civil litigation organization. Our clients come to us in a number of ways, through direct calls, through referrals, but at the end of the day, no matter what we do, whether we just investigate the case, whether we refer it out, whether we consult, whether we file the lawsuit, whether we achieve a successful outcome, we never charge our clients for any of the services. The fundamental core principle is always a fight for the advancement of human rights. With your help, we can continue to provide access to basic legal resources to folks who otherwise wouldn't have that access.
So there you have a little bit about what the Texas Civil Rights Project does. What I hope to do is take you in a little bit more depth today and explain some of the institutional discrimination we take on, the criminal justice issues, the voting rights abuses, and some of the defense of free speech and privacy rights that we bring to people, as well as access to courts and to democracy. So one of the first things I wanted to talk about was a suit that we recently filed against the state of Texas for its denial of birth certificates to American-born children who are citizens of this country. It is a pretty shocking thing to know that there are Americans being born right now who cannot get a birth certificate, and what that means for these brand new Americans. That means that they can't enroll in schools. It often means that they can't get access to medical care. The very rights and privileges that we all take for granted and should, because they are the most basic needs of all Americans. This is something that the state of Texas, as a matter of policy, is denying to children. These children have one thing in common, and one thing only, because they're spread across the state. The thing that the newborn babies have in common are that they are all children of immigrants. Most of those immigrants happen to be undocumented, and that is their otherwise unfortunate chance by which they come into the world. So every person born in the United States has a rock-solid core of our Constitution is a U.S. citizen. And there is no simpler, greater law, not just in the United States, but across the world. If there's anything that's clear, it is you are a citizen of the country in which you are born, and that is your right. How is the state doing this and why? As to the why, it's a little difficult to come up with an answer beneath the facade. The state and its health department, which is carrying out this policy, the way it's doing it is it's saying we need the parents to produce an ID, some sort of identification with which we are comfortable. Now, what should be comfortable? Well, a clear consular ID from any country should be, according to their own rules, something that is a verified document that will allow them to issue a birth certificate for the child, even according to their own rules. Ignore the Constitution for the time being. However, they have made something of an ad hoc decision that the consular ID of the countries of Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador are no longer good enough, even though they have been good enough for decades into the past. There have been rumblings about concern about verification, but of course this is a major governmentally issued ID with the protections that come along with it. Moreover, this is something that has been accepted for decades, and thus far the state of Texas has not been able to produce any actual evidence that there might be some sort of fraud behind documents that parents might hold that are actual consular IDs. And of course, it's not so much the parents that suffer, but the children themselves. And this is an example, if you wonder how the poor get poorer in this country, and those who have the least, this is a perfect example, because here are folks who are born to working class immigrant parents, and the state is attempting to deny them very simple services, very simple basic things that would allow them to get the education, the health care, and the basics that they need to get on their feet and moving to a healthy and happy life as Americans. So we filed suit in federal court in this case, and have already taken it to the state. We hope to win this case in court, or otherwise get the state to come to its senses and do the simple, obvious thing that every other state in this nation does, which is recognize that children who are born in America have a basic right to their citizenship documents. So that is one example of not just institutional discrimination, but disenfranchisement of democracy in this country. Some of the other institutional discrimination instances that we are taking on, for example, involve a suit against the ride-sharing companies, Uber and Lyft, on behalf of people with mobility disabilities. We are doing that because the ride-share companies do not have and are not willing to provide accessible vehicles to people who use wheelchairs. Now, under the Americans with Disabilities Act and other disability laws, if you run a business, you are required to provide equivalent access and services. And I'm not sure if you noticed by the over $8 million that Uber alone has spent on the recent election that's going on at this moment, in part funneling that through its own little advocacy group. But Uber has a lot of money, and so does Lyft. And it does not take a whole lot of money to make the cars, and more importantly, to come up with a system to provide accessible vehicles to people who use wheelchairs and have other disabilities that want to use their company. The issue here isn't so much that every vehicle has to be accessible. The issue is that Uber which uses complicated algorithms and quite a few, and has excellent technology in the palm of its hands, simply has to come up with a way to make sure that it has a few accessible vehicles available at times, and that it can route those vehicles to people who use wheelchairs and need them at the time. So these suits have been ongoing for a little over a year, and we think it's really important, particularly on behalf of some of our partners and clients who have disabilities, to ensure that they have an equal chance to enjoy in the tech boom and the new world and the great technology that we have out there. I think a lot of times we hear from City Council about some of the other issues when it comes to accessing rideshare, some of the dangers that might come along when people don't have proper background checks, or some of the other people who might not have access, but we don't hear much about the folks with disabilities. So that's another group that we're representing, and an issue we're taking on. One other interesting group of folks with disabilities, we just filed suit last week on behalf of blind people who are ready to become lawyers. For those of you who aren't lawyers, before you become a lawyer, one thing you have to do is to pass the bar examination. And the bar exam, it's a pain in the neck. And in order to pass it, you have to study a number of different topics that you wouldn't necessarily ordinarily study during law school. So what typically happens is when folks graduate from law school, they'll take a course that lasts about a month to a month and a half and get study materials, and they pay money to a company to provide this. For the vast majority of law students who graduate, Barbary is the name of the company that accepts thousands of dollars from each graduated law student to provide this education so that people have a chance to pass the bar. Well, the problem is that if you're a person, usually a pretty inspiring person, who happens to be blind or have a major visual disability, you've managed to make it all the way through high school, college, and law school, and act in a field that depends heavily upon reading. The way you've done this in most of these folks' cases is by using a visual reading program, a screen reading program that allows you to focus on whatever text it might be, typically on a screen or on the internet, and it reads that text to you out loud. There are some other versions of this, but it's a very common accessible screen program that almost all blind folks use in order to read things. For reasons that aren't clear, Barbary, which provides this expensive, it costs thousands of dollars to take their course. For reasons that aren't entirely clear, Barbary is not providing its materials in a way that common screen reading programs can read. So if you're taking a Barbary practice test, for example, you can't get access to the answers to that practice test. It's not accessible. If you're trying to read certain electronic materials, they're not accessible. And the result of this is that Barbary provides an inferior service to really inspiring blind folks who have done everything to get to the very door of becoming a lawyer, and then Barbary is putting them at a competitive disadvantage to become lawyers. So that's something that we want to put an end to, and think we will. Let me tell you a little bit about another case that we have that exposes and takes on another type of discrimination.
Nikki Diaz right now live, and here in East Texas, a couple buying a house on Cedar Creek Lake turned away because of the color of their skin. KTK's Nikki Diaz right now live at our News Update Center to tell us more about this.
Yeah, Neil, the situation with Mr. Dodd and his fiancée seems out of place in the year 2015. They say neighbors used racial slurs when they found out he and his fiancée were moving into the neighborhood, and it doesn't stop there. Mr. Dodd and his fiancée were moving into the Clearwater Bay subdivision on Cedar Creek Lake. When the Property Owners Association realized they were moving in, they say the discrimination began. Mr. Dodd says he and his fiancée had neighbors come up to them directly and call them names. Then the former property owners were told they could not, quote, convey their property to certain kinds of people because they were subject to deed restrictions on the property. Mr. Dodd moved forward with renovations to the property until it was vandalized beyond repair. Now, with the help of the Texas Civil Rights Project, Mr. Dodd filed a preliminary injunction today, hoping to stop the subdivision property owners from discriminating against him.
And my wife got the place for our grandkids to come have a piece, one place during the summer. You know, that's why we're going to retire at. You know, I worked hard for it, and for someone to discriminate against me, to tell me that I can't live somewhere because of the color of my skin, it's not right.
Now, the Property Owners Association deed states, no law shall be conveyed to any person of African descent.
So, in the year 2016, there is on the records a deed restriction that says that no person of African descent can buy or own property. That is pretty shocking and disturbing, and something that we're not sitting down about. We filed suit, and in fact, actually had a preliminary injunction granted against the Property Owners Association to put a stop to this kind of blatant institutional racism. Mr. Dodd is really a simple man who just wants to find a little place to retire on the lake where his grandchildren can visit him and be at peace. And clearly, the Clearwater Bay Property Owners Association is doing everything in its power to stop that. And a deed restriction straight out of the Jim Crow era is not acceptable in this era. One other type of discrimination that we've recently taken on is that against LGBT folk. We filed suit against the Kilgore Independent School District on behalf of a young woman who was in high school. She was a 15-year-old girl when this happened, and she had two teachers who were her softball coaches. This young woman was a promising softball player and hoped to one day get a scholarship to play at college. Unfortunately, when her coaches found out that she had a girlfriend, they forced her to join them in a meeting in a locker room, locked the door behind them, cornered her, forced her to admit that she was gay, then took her cell phone from her, and despite her protests that whatever they do, they don't tell her mom, called her mom and disclosed to her mother that she was gay, causing untold disturbance in her family life, a rift between her and her mom, and leading to all kinds of psychological issues, including attempted suicide. So this is something that where you have a public institution that is delving into the most innermost private thought, sanctum, and identity of a person, and utterly not just unwarranted, but invading her constitutional privacy as well. So we filed the suit, and not only did we force the Kilgore School District to institute new policies preventing its employees from ever doing something like this again, but we also went and provided a training. Myself, along with 2 members of the LGBT section of the state bar, together we trained somewhere around the range of 1,000 different teachers and school staff about not just privacy rights of people who might be LGBT, but other issues that are important, like bullying of LGBT folks, discrimination, and things that clearly people in the school district where something like this would happen didn't know. That training was recorded and is given to all new staff in the school district, and will always be provided on an annual refresher basis to all the school staff in that district. Now, it's not just discrimination proper that Texas Civil Rights Project takes on. We also defend the voting rights against disenfranchisement of Texans. And recently, with the help of our new director, we just filed a suit against the state of Texas for preventing Texans across the state from being able to register to vote. Now, the way this happens is interesting and a little insidious. What happens is, if you typically you're able, one way you're able to register to vote is through getting a Texas driver's license, whether you get a new one for the first time or whether you're renewing it. Now, many people these days, myself included, go on a website and simply renew a driver's license, and that's a way that you can start the process for getting a new one. If you went through that process online, you would be told by the state's website that you can register to vote in the process, and you click some buttons and put in some information, and you would have the impression that you had registered to vote. In fact, the state of Texas doesn't allow you to register to vote online using that process. It actually requires you to send in an actual physical application. But that's not something that would be clear to you if you were using the website. In perhaps the biggest irony of all, even though the state of Texas doesn't allow you to register to vote online using this process, it does, however, allow you to be deregistered from voting online. So I think that's a pretty good example of how it would not be difficult for the state of Texas to make this process possible. And we have filed suit alleging that this is a violation of the Voting Rights Act, more commonly known to many as the Motor Voter Law, and plan to make it possible so that Texans, particularly the types of Texans that are most likely affected by something like this, are not disenfranchised from our democratic system. Now, I mentioned that the Texas Civil Rights Project has a long and storied history of taking on criminal justice issues. One of those, one version or one example of the types of issues that we take on involves prisoner rights, and we have been very much involved in issues related to extreme heat in prisons. Let's see if we can't learn a little bit more about that right now.
I'm Eugene Blackman, live in Belleville, Texas, but I do part-time electrical work. I got 40 years for possessing a stolen goods case that I received in 1986 that I should have never received no time. And sent me to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. I went for parole violation on a I think it was not reporting, failure to report, or late reporting, or something like that. Ooh, man, it's like an urban, living in an urban. There's no ventilation. Water condition as for drinking water. There's no drinking fountain. You got to drink out the sink. The temperature from other bodies even increased the heat. Some went through nausea. Some of them went through, some passed out, some collapsed. And some was like me, blurred vision, slur talk, nausea, and headaches, and just unbalanced. The only consolation we could get was say like at about 2 o'clock at night until 6 or 7 that morning. And when my blood pressure went up so high, I would go to the infirmary, and sometimes the infirmary would record me coming and delete it from the computer, because they didn't want to hear the fact that the pedometer was too high. And so they would do the cover-up. They Watergate that. So we did bring it to the administration's attention through step 1, step 2s of grieving, and through I-60 of a requested. At first they would sign off on it and say that they were going to look into it. Then later they would ignore. They would later send people like from maintenance. He would come in with his thermometer, digital thermometer, and he would make a statement, this don't lie. So when he sit there and read it, I said 108 degrees, that ain't lying, is it, Mark? Well, we got to do something about it. I'll talk to you later and get out. That's all we ever got from them. They had something like 54 people there. The normal capacity for that dorm was 28 people.
So this is an example of some of the people that many of us forget about. Folks are taken, put in prison, locked away, and not only is the key often thrown away, but so are the basic conditions that human beings need to live. When we brought the first of these suits, the judge, during a hearing, the federal judge said, how can 130 degrees be constitutional? And Mr. Blackman, who you heard from, is remarkable in that he's one of the few folks that we could actually represent who's still alive. There are a number of people in Texas prisons who have serious heart and health conditions where it's not just miserable to live in conditions that exceed 126 degrees, but deadly. And we have brought a series of suits across the state against the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. And frankly, we didn't want to have to bring a series of suits, but they have fought this tooth and nail, institution by institution, saying that there is no reason why they should have to provide very simple, humane conditions, like a prison that gives conditions under 130 degrees. So these are often tragic cases and always disturbing ones. We've been fighting these cases now for over half a decade, and we intend to take them to their end and make sure that even people who end up in prisons don't have to suffer from extreme heat or die as a result of what could very easily be remedied. So there's an example of some of the criminal justice cases that we take on at TCRP, but not the only one. One thing I did want to touch base on is it's not just prisoners and victims of police misconduct that we represent, though. Right now, we are also representing a police officer. Robert goes by the name of Robert Lloyd. He is a decorated officer who has served for more than 25 years. When Williamson County held interviews in order to hire a constable for its Precinct 3 after the elected constable had stepped down only a month or two after being elected, it interviewed 5 people, and Robert Lloyd was one of those people. Mr. Lloyd was very excited to have the interview. He'd worked as a Williamson County constable in that precinct and was very familiar with what he wanted to do to make it a better place. So he took some time, thought about it, had some really good answers to the types of questions he expected in the interview. When he showed up to the interview, which was conducted by the 5 Williamson County commissioners, or the 4 commissioners and what's called the Williamson County judge, the head of the commissioners' court, he was a little surprised to hear the types of questions that he was asked. Among them, what, Mr. Lloyd, is your view about abortion? Mr. Lloyd, how do you feel about gay marriage? Mr. Lloyd, what church do you go to? And how do you vote? Do you vote conservatively? These are questions that should not have been asked of a person who is simply applying to work in a law enforcement job. It really doesn't matter what your view is of issues like abortion when your job is to make sure that process is properly served on people or that people don't break the speed limit when they're driving. And Mr. Lloyd said as much about some of the questions he was asked. He said that, when it comes to gay marriage, it really doesn't matter what my opinion is because I'm an officer of the law and I'm sworn to enforce those laws. And in fact, at the time when he was interviewing, he said this was the issue of gay marriage was one before the Supreme Court. So it might very well change sometime while I am working as the constable. So all the more that my opinion isn't something that should be involved here. When he said that, one of the Williamson County commissioners told him, "You better have a better answer than that if you want to be the constable." We filed suit on a number of grounds, including employment discrimination based on religion, based on free speech, on association, as well as an invasion of privacy. And the Texas Civil Rights Project will represent Mr. Lloyd to the end and is scheduled to go to trial on this issue in late September of this year. We look forward to defending his rights. In our view, under the Constitution, it simply shouldn't be an option for a state entity to be able to make employment decisions for law enforcement officers based on people's personal, private, religious beliefs and associations. Another example of institutional invasion of privacy is one that you might have heard of. If not, you might be interested to know that the state of Texas had taken and stored the genetic information of over 4 million babies born in the state of Texas. It had done this when a baby is born. Typically, there's a little blood taken from the baby's heel, but instead of taking 2 little blots of that for purposes of screening for genetic and other illnesses, they took 6 little blots. The 2 were used for just the purpose that parents thought they were, for screening those illnesses and genetic issues. The other 4 disappeared into the ether. They were never taken with any parent's consent. And I know this may sound hard to believe, but you can look it up. When we filed suit, the facts came out, and the legislature actually had to convene and address this issue with the law. But the genetic information of these little babies, 4 million of them, was being taken, stored by an educational institution, and then sold to big pharmaceutical companies and also to the federal military. when we discovered this, we filed suit immediately. And as I said, not only did we get the courts to put a stop to it, but even forced the legislature to take action and prevent this from happening ever again. One more example, we don't just deal with police misconduct or official misconduct. Sometimes we defend people's free speech rights when we're doing that, and in the process, we often get into the very items or issues that people speak about. You may 99. These were children who walked out of their schools to speak out about immigrant rights. 99 of them were criminally prosecuted for walking out on curfew violations. We assembled a team of pro bono lawyers as well as ourselves to help defend them criminally, and also sued the police and the school district to end all of the prosecutions, and also force the school district to do a training on free speech and constitutional rights for their students and their teachers, among many other free speech suits. I gather we're probably getting. It's probably a good time for me to stop and get some questions. Before I do, I did want to mention our Violence Against Women Act, Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA program. This is a program in which we represent women and children who are immigrants in helping to escape their abusers. In these cases, their abusers are always U.S. citizens, and if you are a woman or a child trapped in an abusive relationship and happen to be an immigrant without a legal status or without a documented status in the United States, that's something that an abuser can use against you. So if a woman sought to escape the relationship or the marriage, the abusive husband could say, by all means leave. That's great. I'll report you to ICE or to the police, and you'll get caught, and you'll get deported from this country, and I'll keep the kids. I don't think you should leave. And that is a very effective tool to perpetuate domestic violence. So across the state, we have a unique circuit rider programs where we go out into rural areas to help provide information to folks about their potential remedies to escape these relationships and help them in the legal process of getting documents that will allow them to live legally and escape their abusers. It's a very powerful program that provides options for people who often don't have one. So with that, I would love to hear what you want to talk about and tell you a little bit more about the Texas Civil Rights Project.
Yes, raise your hands high. Max Stout has a question.
Please describe for us the relationship between your program and the ACLU.
Well, the ACLU takes on civil rights and civil liberty issues within the state. We are not necessarily dissimilar, but the Texas Civil Rights Project is focused on litigation and education. So I think you'll find that the ACLU does a lot of work in the legislature when it's in session. Sometimes we'll work together. I think that TCRP has a real focus on practical social justice. So I think that while we will stand up for the constitutional rights of folks, I think we want to make sure that those are the rights of the people who need representation the most. There are times where we think very long and hard about the types of cases that we want to take on. And the way, when we do take cases on, we want to make sure that we bring impact litigation. We're a relatively small organization. We have 35 to 40 folks, depending upon when during the year or at the time in our 5 offices. And we take a fairly small percentage of the potential cases. When we do, we want to systemic change with those cases. So I think that's an explanation a bit about the Texas Civil Rights Project.
Wayne, your examples were pretty stunning. One I hadn't heard about was the genetic information collection, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on who or what organization or what laws were behind the collection initially, and what's been done to peel that back.
Well, that's very interesting. I'm not sure that it was particularly widely publicized, or even when we filed the suit, the justification or reason for doing this was not. I don't think we ever got a good answer on that. It's the simple way of putting it. If I recall correctly, I believe that there was a big old storage bank below Texas A&M somewhere, and within that they were storing all these blotters of blood and the genetic information related to it, and I don't think many people knew why it was happening. It was just a policy. If you were at a hospital and a baby was born, you just did the blots of baby's blood there, and it made, I think, to both parents and doctors and nurses and whoever else was participating in this, I don't think many people questioned it because they assumed it was government benevolence, a benign intent. In fact, it wasn't. And like I said, the suit we filed on constitutional privacy grounds. That is personal, private genetic information, which of course is becoming more and more important from day to day. And the important thing here is non-consensual, and even more so than without consent, it wasn't informed or by consent. So folks just didn't know, and I think that that was a suit that was pretty clearly on strong constitutional privacy grounds, and the legislature acted relatively quickly, particularly given the backlog of bills you see in the legislature to change this, because it was a scandal that I don't think really very many people at all were in favor of.
I'm going back to your first example of the citizenship issue. When you're trying to establish that you were born in the USA, what relevance is in any other information? I don't quite get that.
If I understand the question, it's what relevance is what?
The kind of official information, official documents that they were being asked for. I mean, all you have to do, I would think, would be establish, where and when you were born.
One would think that would be enough, and that's a big question here. But every birth certificate does have a place for a mother and a father, and that is where the state is holding up the process, so to speak. I think you're absolutely right that a birth certificate really is about the person who is born. And since everybody is there in the hospital when it happens, there's not much question about whether or not that baby is born and whether or not they're in the U.S. or at that particular place. But because it is the state's position, at least currently, that they are concerned about the veracity and security of this birth certificate, because they want to make sure that the parents' names on that birth certificate are verified by documents that only they choose to be verified. We do not think that is an accurate representation of the Constitution of the United States.
What about the data breach with the state comptroller's office? Where is the case on that? I know you guys had been working on that.
We tried to depose the comptroller and filed a motion in court, which was granted, allowing us to depose the comptroller. That case was appealed, and eventually the courts ruled that we did not have a right to actually ask the comptroller questions about that, which pretty much ended the evidence state, our ability to provide evidence for that case.
I think the work you're doing on voter rights and voter ID laws is extremely important. I've heard Texas described as not being a red state or a blue state, but being a non-voting state. And a lot of that is associated with the difficulty of registering for vote and having the proper ID for voting. My question to you, what are the constitutional guarantees and federal laws that are underpinning your work in this area?
In this case, it's actually, and there are occasionally there are constitutional underpinnings. Equal Protection Act clause of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution certainly can come into play when you have discrimination involved. But the Voting Rights Act is the primary tool of the trade in defending the rights of disenfranchised voters across the state. And that is the basis of the suit that we filed on behalf of a number of voters who were mistakenly led to believe that they had registered to vote online on the State of Texas website, but in fact who were not. Now, the Texas Civil Rights Project is taking action across the state, and it's not just via suit either. We certainly have education programs, and one thing that we're trying to do now is go to the young potential voters out there, and we're working on putting together educational programs for high school students out there in coordination with some other groups. It should be that it's easy to register to vote, and that's not necessarily the case. And it's not even necessarily easy to register people to vote. In fact, the laws are such that you could be convicted of a crime if you don't follow a number of state procedures to become certified to educate people just by getting people together and sending in. Sometimes folks can be prosecuted for mailing in their registration. So we want to make this an issue, let people know, educate folks, and we're also currently looking into issues related to people who might not have the opportunity to register folks to vote or to be certified to do so if they did so, say, in Spanish or were native Spanish speakers, as well as going out to the public schools and encouraging the Secretary of Education of this state to have schools be a vehicle by which people are educated. When you think about it, if you take civics classes or history classes throughout K through 12 and learn of all these facts about everybody from George Washington to Barack Obama, and all you have to memorize all these dates and things, wouldn't it be a rather basic, simple civics lesson to have people who are in high school get the documents with which to register to vote to become living participants in the history that we will create? It seems like it would be the most basic civics lesson of all, and yet that's not happening in our public high schools, and that's something that should be happening.
You've had many important victories. Was there any case that you found particularly personally satisfying and significant?
I will say it was pretty interesting to be involved right post 9/11. There was a wave of discrimination against South Asians and Arab Americans across the country, and it happened to be that in basically my first year of practice, TCRP was approached by a U.S. citizen who happened to be of South Asian descent and have a notably Muslim name. and his children, their grandfather had passed away, and he and his 3 children were flying from Austin to visit, to go to the funeral. At that time, the pilot of the plane kicked them off the plane because their name was Muslim sounding. And it started a grand saga of a lawsuit that didn't end for roughly 4 years. We brought the case on discrimination grounds, but before we were done, the Transportation Security Administration and the Department of Justice had jumped in saying that this was secret, sensitive security information, and that the flight list alone, the no-fly list, wasn't something that could possibly be disclosed as evidence, even for the judges and the lawyers' eyes only, because it would endanger the national security. This was the immediate post 9/11 wave of paranoia that had struck the country. So there was a time where I actually showed up to court, and a Department of Justice attorney showed up with a typewritten document from the head of the TSA, Rear Admiral Loy, that actually told the federal judge who was hearing the case that he didn't have jurisdiction to even listen to the case. So it was a fascinating situation. It ended up with a dovetailing suit from the Department of Transportation against the airline. When we ended up successfully resolving the suit, it forced the airline, American Airlines, to change their policies and procedures for how they removed and dealt with ticketing and took people off planes, as well as to provide training and education for their employees. And the Department of Transportation suit resolved with $3 million that would fund that education and training. So it was a fascinating time. And the thing that, of all the interest that was going on there, our client was somebody who had never really, spoken publicly or kind of stood up about anything. He'd always been a good citizen who followed the rules and, never got into trouble about anything. And it was really inspiring to watch him go from somebody who had never really worried about these things to stand up for his rights and speak strongly and passionately about his rights. And it was really, I think, in the end, probably his visible bravery and that really carried the day and convinced everybody. In many ways, he stood down a multinational corporation and the federal government on his own and made the world a better place for him.
Thank you, Wayne Krause Yang. Very inspiring.